What if the highway you trust is the one thing trying to lead you astray? What if your GPS speaks in a voice you do not recognize, and every mile marker you pass returns to you like a loop you cannot escape? Some stories are too disturbing to be true, but the open road at night has a way of making strangers out of familiar places. Engines hum like lullabies that never let you sleep. Headlights paint ghosts across the asphalt. And sometimes, the voice on the CB is not a driver at all. Welcome back to Whispering Abyss. Tonight, I have something truly haunting for you. From phantom way stations to deliveries that refuse to stay quiet, each tale slips into the cab with you and shuts the door. Every story is fully fictional and YouTube-friendly, but they will feel terrifyingly real. Which story creeped you out the most? Tell me in the comments, and let me know where you would never park again after night. Story 1. The CB that would not shut up. I learned early that night driving is a bargain with silence. You trade daylight for empty lanes, but the dark wants conversation. Tires hum, lines flick by, and the cab becomes a listening booth. You start talking to your own thoughts. You talk to the dashboard like it is a friend. I kept one rule to keep myself level. If the CB talks first, I pull over. Radios do not get lonely, people do. That night the sky had the color of an old bruise, and the moon was a coin too thin to spend. I was running solo through a stretch of state highway that always felt longer than the map measured. The rule rode with me, quiet in the passenger seat, like a prayer I never said out loud. I did not expect the radio to speak my name. I did not expect it to speak in my voice. The run was a simple one on paper. Frozen goods out of the distribution yard, crossed 2 counties, up the ridge line, and into the early morning dock at a chain store with lights that never sleep. Schedule wanted me there by 4. The kind of job that should be muscle memory. Keep it steady, keep it clean, sign the papers, roll again. The weather was honest but tired. A low ceiling of clouds sat on the hills. The world felt muffled, like a room packed with coats. The asphalt was dry. The shoulders were littered with old cones and flattened soda, cans that flashed silver when my beams caught them. The lane ahead was mine for 20 miles at a time. Every now and then a set of taillights would swim up out of the distance, then slide away. It should have been peaceful. It should have been a kind of run where the radio stays boring, where Channel 19 is all whistle and road names I do not know. The static began like a breath on the glass. That soft, damp sound you make when your face gets close to a window. I checked the squelch, tuned the knob with 2 fingers the way I always do, a little left, a little right. The crackle smoothed out, then flared again with a sharp line of tone. I told myself it was bleed from a tower on a ridge, whether doing tricks, the usual. Then it said my name. Not a guess, not a handle. The 2 soft syllables my mother used when she wanted me to come down for dinner. I felt my shoulders rise up like I was trying to make a shell out of myself. My hand stayed on the wheel, but my attention slid sideways to the black box with the green numbers. The voice did not ask if anyone had their ears on. It said my name again, then it said, "You missed the sign." I flipped to 17, the kind of reflex you use when a bee gets in the cab. Move away, stay calm, let it find its own exit. The new channel was clean for a beat, only the quiet drip of distance. Then the exact same timbre breathed into it, as if the sound had been poured from one cup to another. The voice said road name, mile number, and weather note. It sounded like something I would have said, logging details into my phone. It sounded like I was hearing my own pre-trip. I tried 15, then 1, then back to 19. The voice followed every jump like a shadow. It did not ask for a copy. It did not want to chew the fat. It told me coordinates, then corrected them by 1 digit. It listed 2 exits, then said the 3rd was gone, then said it was never there. I told myself somebody was messing around with a frequency hopper. I told myself the signal was bouncing off low clouds. Then the voice said, "Look out the driver mirror," and I did. The same mile marker slid by again, the number that had just passed 10 minutes earlier. I know that marker well. It leans a little. It has a weed that always curls around its post like it wants to pull it down. I had marked it in my head earlier because of that plant, a spiral of green in a season that was already gray. I watched it reappear, wrong in the way a face would be wrong if the eyes were where the mouth belonged. I checked the odometer. The numbers did not argue. They told me I had gone forward. The world told me I had circled. The fuel gauge shivered. Not a drop, not a rise, a shiver like someone had run a cold finger across the needle. I listened for wind, but heard only my own engine. The voice said, "Again, you missed a sign." This time it did not sound scolding, only tired, like it had said the same thing 100 nights. I came up on the shoulder and checked the mirror again. There was nothing there but the ghost of my own trailer lights bending back along the guardrail. I have a habit when my nerves were thin. I count things that should not be counted. Fence posts, reflectors, the blink cycle of a far-off radio tower. Somewhere in the middle of the 4s and the 8s, I saw a shape on the shoulder. A person or a post. It is hard to tell its speed in that kind of light. The radio filled in what my eyes could not. Blue jacket. No buck. Thumb tucked in like they were ashamed to ask. I eased off a touch, and the shape kept its distance. The CB said, "Do not stop." Then it described the face I would have seen if I did. It described a mouth that smiled with only the top teeth. It described pupils that did not close down when the high beams hit. The words made my knuckles go white on the wheel. The shape balled into the dark again, a knot pulled tight. I did not pick up strangers, not anymore, and that night the road did not want me to try. They formed up behind me at the base of the ridge. 3 rigs with no plates and no company names, curtains pulled tight, no marker lights on the trailers. They came out of a curve as if they had been painted in behind me, fresh and glossy. Their spacing was perfect. Their speed matched mine like they were tied to my bumper by invisible rope. I tapped the brakes, then climbed a little. They tapped and climbed with me, exact. I reached for the mic, and the voice grabbed it before I could. It spoke from all 3 stacks at once. I could hear it in the mirror, even though that makes no sense. "Breaker 19, it said, my own name again, and then this, we followed you last time. The back of my neck tingled like a small animal had run up under my collar. I wanted another truck with a real driver in it. I wanted to see a hand in a window. I wanted a horn that sounded human. What I had were 3 shadows with engines that never missed a beat, and my own voice leading them like a shepherd. The sign started 5 miles out. Open, open, open. White letters shouted from green boards that had been sun-bleached almost to mint. I knew this way station. It is never open at 2 in the morning. It is the kind of place you only see in daylight. A squat building with glass that always looks a little greasy. That night, every sign told me to prepare to stop, so I did. The ramp was lit. Sodium lamps rattled in their housings and made everything the color of tea. The shack in the middle of the lanes glowed like a television left on in a sleeping house. I rolled up and waited for a human shape to slide behind the counter. Nothing moved. The screen on the scale flickered numbers, then steadied on zeros. The voice said, "The clerk is on break." Then it said, "The clerk never came back." The doors were unlocked. I could have walked in. I could have put my hand on the warm glass and begged it to show me a reflection that belonged to this world. I pulled away from the station, and the convoy fell in a line behind me again. The voice changed its trick. It started using names I had used in other lives. The handle I took when I was new and thought it sounded cool. The handle a woman gave me one summer on the coast because my laugh was louder then. The handle I used only once on a dare, a private joke not worth repeating. Each one rolled out like a bead on a string. I felt as though someone had been ledgering my nights in a book I had never seen. Then it spoke the one I never told. The name I gave myself on the night I almost left the road for good. The night a curve was sharper than the map, and I stopped with my grill 10 inches from a tree and my heart sitting in my mouth like a live thing that wanted out. I had never said that handle out loud. I had only thought it, then put it away with the rest of the almosts. Hearing it that night felt like a hand on my chest, gentle and heavy. Fog pooled on the downslope like milk in a bowl. My beams hit and froze, 2 white walls that turned the lane into a tunnel. The voice softened. It told me I had one chance. It told me to take the next service road, the one marked for maintenance only. It told me the map would show it for a second, then take it away, and if I did not turn while it was there, I would never see it again. I wanted proof. I wanted mile numbers and a landmark. The voice gave me a smell instead. Hot dirt, sage, the kind of scent that rises when a dry place drinks a mist. The shape on the shoulder appeared again, closer now, head tilted like it was listening to my engine. The convoy tightened. I could feel their heat. I could feel their weight like a tide coming up the beach. I took my hands off the mic and put both on the wheel and told myself the rule. If the CB talks first, I pull over. I did not pull over. I turned. The service road was there the way a memory is there, clear when you look right at it, gone when you glance away. Gravel rattled up into the wells, and the fog thinned as if the trees had stolen it. The convoy did not follow. The shape on the shoulder watched me pass, then folded into the mist like it had been drawn on it with a finger and the line had been smudged. I reached the main route again, 2 miles later, and the sky had begun to lighten at the edges, a soft bruise turning into morning. I made the dock with 3 minutes to spare. The clerk handed me a receipt, and it had a note on the bottom in light pencil, a number and a word that looked like my handwriting even though it was not. The word was again. The CB sat quiet on the dash, all green numbers and no breath. I turned it off and the silence felt earned. Story 2. Phantom of Mile Marker 66. Truckers have a way of passing legends down the road the same way they pass thermoses and lighters. Some of them are funny, some are warnings, and a few stick like burrs in your head. One of the worst is about mile marker 66, a lonely stretch of state highway with more crosses planted in the ditch than anywhere else along the run. They say if you drive it past midnight, you'll see a man on the shoulder waving you down. Some swear he's missing part of his face. Others say he looks normal until he gets in your cab, and then the radio dies and you hear someone breathing in the sleeper. I had heard the talk for years but never gave it much weight. The road is full of tall tales. But one winter run took me across that exact marker. And by the end of the night, I learned why no one ever laughs when they talk about 66. The approach to 66 is nothing to look at. Low fences, a few broken trees, and a long smear of highway that refuses to bend until the land forces it. The air felt as if the world had stopped just a little. No insects, no distant farm dog. Even the dashboard clock seemed to tick without sound. I eased the rig into that hush and let the cruise hold steady. The sky hung low and colorless, the kind of ceiling that makes you feel like you're driving under a lid. The cab shared the silence. The thermos sat heavy in its holder. The sleeper curtain barely moved. Every now and then the road stripes slid through the beams with a faint shimmer, and the mirrors gave me the same picture again and again. I checked the radio out of habit and then left it alone. I breathed through my nose to keep the rhythm calm. I told myself I would not look at the marker. I told myself I would look straight ahead and let the number pass like any other. The beams caught a figure on the shoulder long before the marker came into view. A man stood with one arm raised, palm flat. Not a thumbs up, not a wave. His coat hung wrong on him. It made a shape that did not match the shape of a person who is warm. His head tilted in that careful way you see in people who listen more than they speak. He did not step toward the lane. He held still and let the light take him. The next blink cleared the shoulder. He was gone. No scuff in the gravel. No flake of blue cloth spinning in the wake. The white hash lines rolled on as if nothing had happened. I checked the mirror and saw only the long pale reach of my own tail lights along the guardrail. My hands tightened on the wheel and a thought rose up from the old stories. Do not stop. Do not call out. If you want a ride, he will be there again. If he is what they say he is, you do not want it closer. The CB chattered alive like a mouth that had been waiting. I heard a driver say, "There is someone at 66 again." Another answered with a sigh that sounded like it came out of a winter coat. A third said, "Do not slow, not even for a blink." They passed road names and lane conditions, and it all felt like a lace over the one thing they wanted to say. Keep rolling. Pretend you do not see him. If you do, the cab will not feel like yours anymore. Then a new voice pushed in. Calm. Flat. He said I stopped one night. He said the man looked normal when the door swung open. He said the radio quit the moment the stranger climbed up and that the air turned cold even though the heater was on full. Someone asked where he took the man. The calm voice said nowhere worth naming. He would not say more. The channel went thin. I listened to that thinness for a mile and felt like something had stepped into the trailer behind me without making a sound. I pulled into a lonely station 2 exits before the marker. The canopy lights buzzed like angry flies and turned the pumps the color of old paper. Inside, the clerk had the permanent stoop of someone who picks up drop coins for a living. He had my jacket, then the rig, then the clock. He knew where I was headed and when. He did not ask. He said, "Be careful," and it sounded like a prayer he said to everyone who came through after midnight. I asked about accidents near 66. He nodded and kept nodding like the motion might keep the bad luck from pooling. He said people say the same things when they come back shaken. A man on the shoulder. A voice that asked for a ride without opening its mouth. He reached under the counter and set a little black notebook on top of the lottery slips. Someone left this in a cab last winter. Never came back for it. The cover was scuffed and the elastic was tired. On the first page was a road number and a date with no year. I drove back out and the highway felt like a conversation I was late to. The notebook lay open on the passenger seat and the pages breathed in the heater flow. The handwriting was tight and even. The entries were simple lines about miles and loads and sunrise times. Then a paragraph broke the neat march. It said, "Do not stop at 66. It said he cannot climb unless you let him. It said he is not what he seems, but he does not lie." The marker rose out of the shoulder grass like a tooth. The man was there again, same arm raised, same tilt of head. I did not see him step out from anywhere. He was simply there. My foot lifted for half a second, and the cruise clicked off. The rig slowed the way a big animal lowers itself to the ground. The man did not move closer. He waited for me to choose. I thought of the calm voice and the clerk and the note that said he does not lie. I clicked the 4 ways and rolled to the shoulder. I cracked the door and the night breathed into the cab. Cold. Metallic. His face looked wrong in the way a photograph looks wrong when the exposure is off. Not damaged. Not missing. Just slightly unreal, like a painting of someone you have met. He put a hand on the rail and paused. I realized no frost smoke came from his mouth. He climbed in with careful steps and sat without looking at me. He folded his hands. He said thank you. His voice was normal. A tired man. A long road. That was all. I pulled back onto the lane, and the radio clicked to silence, even though the light said it was on. The man asked where I was headed, and I told him the town and the dock hour. He said I used to know a man there. He said he had been trying to get back for a long time. He asked for nothing. He did not even ask for heat. He stared through the windshield like he was looking at a different road laid over the one we were on. His hands did not move. His shoes were clean. The GPS shifted a half-inch on the screen as if a hand under the glass had nudged the map. The blue line slid to a frontage road I knew did not connect. Ahead, the overhead sign promised an exit that never existed, a pair of numbers I had never seen in that order. The man did not look at the screen. He said you could take the next right, and it will be faster. I said there is no right. He said there is for me. The signs began to repeat. A diner I knew had closed 3 years ago appeared on a panel, as if it had just opened. A town name came up twice in 1 mile. The distance markers counted backward, then forward again, like a nervous habit. The rig hummed, steady and patient. The man finally turned his head. He studied my face and said, "You hear the road when it speaks, do you not?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to say, I'm only a driver with a job. Instead, I asked him who he needed to see in that town. He said a man who never made it home. The frontage road existed for us and only for us. Gravel gave way to old concrete, and then to a cracked pad with 2 picnic tables and a map sign with no map inside. The trees leaned in, their tips black against the sky that had forgotten starlight. I set the brake and listened. Somewhere under the pad, water moved like a slow breath. The place did not appear on my phone. The clock said a minute had passed since the highway. My gut said much more. He looked at the empty map case. He touched the frame with his fingers like someone touches a door they have not opened in years. He told me he left a shift at a warehouse on the edge of town. He told me he got a ride to this very spot on a night with the same low sky. He told me he stepped out to stretch, and the driver fell asleep and rolled back onto the highway without him. He kept speaking, and the night swallowed the sound until only the meaning remained. No anger, no blame, only the weight of a road that never gave him another chance to be seen. We sat in that not-quite-real place until a gray line formed along the edge of the trees. He turned toward it like a plant turns toward a window. Dawn had not arrived yet, but it had announced itself. He set his hands on his knees and smiled the small smile of someone who remembers a name. He said, "I was not trying to scare you. I'm only walking the same mile until someone lets me finish it." Then he looked past me, through the windshield, and the smile tilted. He said, "There she is." I followed his gaze and saw nothing but thick air and the suggestion of shoulder. I blinked, and he faded, not like a trick of the eye, but like a reflection swallowed by a deeper light. The heater sighed. The radio light flickered once and steadied. The seat was empty. On the glass of the empty map case, a thin fog line wrote 2 words that were already fading. "Thank you." I did not know if they were meant for me or for someone he could finally see waiting on the other side of the road. Back on the highway, the marker slid by without ceremony. The CB picked up a morning dispatcher, calling out lanes like nothing unusual had passed through the night. I reached the town just after sunrise, tired in a clean way that felt like the end of a long chore. When I parked at the dock and reached for the logbook, the little black journal lay on the passenger seat, even though I'd left it closed under the elastic. A new line had been added in the same even hand. It listed my route number and the time I had pulled into the ghost rest stop. It ended with the town name and the words "made a home." I checked the first page again and finally noticed the date. Winter, no year. The clerk had said someone left it last winter. Maybe it had been many winters. Maybe time forgets itself at 66. I slid the journal into the glove box and let the cab fill with ordinary daylight. Story 3. Rest Stop 19 after midnight highway safety is a promise stitched together with paint and lights. Rest areas pretend to be little islands of calm, where you can breathe without watching the mirror and sip something warm while the engine ticks as it cools. Most of them keep that promise. A few do not. Drivers talk about those the way you talk about dreams you do not want to have again. You lower your voice. You keep details soft. You say maybe it was the weather or the hours or the way the road sings in your ears after too long. Rest Stop 19 sits on a spur between 2 counties that never agree on anything. Some trucks swear they have parked there and slept like the dead. Others say the place only shows up after midnight, and if you find it then, do not stay. They say the building lights are too bright, and the lot feels too level, like a set built to mimic a place you think you know. I did not believe any of it until the night I missed my usual exit and saw the sign for 19. The load was feather light and the schedule kind. I rolled past my familiar pull-off without thinking, then realized I needed a quick stop to rinse my eyes and stretch my back. The blue reflective board appeared on the right like a solution to a question I had not asked aloud. Rest Area 19. 1 mile. The arrow pointed into a patch of trees that looked more like charcoal than pine in the glow of the headlights. The ramp curved and the world grew quiet in a way that made the engine sound like a whisper. The lot was crisp, lines newly painted. No oil shadows. No snack wrappers hurted by the wind. The building stood square at the far end, its windows white with light. The picnic tables looked clean and close together, as if dragged into place by someone who wanted them to match. I eased into a pull-through that welcomed the tractor like a hand shaping clay. The clock on the dash cut to 12:01. I told myself it was luck, nothing more. I walked up to the building under lights that hummed without flicker. A moth touched the lens and found no heat, then drifted away like a thought. The glass door shone with a polite polish. A paper sign sat neatly at eye level. Open. The metal handles had that cold satin feel of real maintenance. I pulled. Chains rasped inside like a stretched snake. Behind the doors, a figure moved across the lobby, not hurried, not slow, just a person with a job. A blue shirt, a set of keys that should have solved my small problem. I knocked once and lifted my empty coffee cup as a prop. The figure turned, but their head did not line up cleanly with their shoulders. The distance or the light made them look like 2 frames misaligned. They walked toward a back corridor with hands at their sides. I knocked a second time, and the sound landed in the lobby without echo, as if the room had been drawn on paper and the paper did not care. Two machines stood in a side alcove like quiet guards. One sold drinks. One sold everything else. I could hear the little refrigeration heart thrum, a rhythm you only notice when the night has chosen to be empty. I pressed my thumb to the display, and the numbers lit. The bill acceptor opened its mouth. I fed it a 5 and watched it swallow neat and smooth. The spiral holding a sleeve of cookies twitched as if thinking about me. I leaned down to catch the label reflected in the base panel. The outlet below was dark. No plug, no cord. The machine hummed anyway, content and calm. Inside, the rows were almost straight, but not quite. The candy bars listed 3 degrees like soldiers about to faint. A bag of chips slid half an inch toward the drop, and then inched itself back. I touched the glass. The cookie sleeve rotated 1 notch without my command. I felt the hairs on my wrist stand up as if a small wind had moved across the skin. I pressed cancel. The bill did not return. The machine blinked the word exact and went still. The hallway to the restrooms stretched longer than the boxy building should allow. Gray tile, gray walls, a stripe of blue near the floor that made the passage feel like a pool that had been poured without water. My boots carried my echo with them for 4 steps, and then the echo quit like a tired friend. I paused to listen. Somewhere ahead, water tapped in endless polite rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. Beneath it, softer, another set of steps matched mine, half a beat late. I started forward again, counting ceiling panels to trap my nerves. 12, 19, 31. A turn should have arrived and did not. The light remained perfectly even, no ballast buzz, no insects circling the fixtures. The tapping grew into a small conversation between pipes. A whisper brushed my shoulder at the exact spot where a hand dryer should have stuck out from the wall. I looked and saw nothing but clean paint. My mouth tasted like the inside of a coin. When the door finally appeared, it was marked with a simple icon and no words. I opened it and found a mirror that did not want to keep up. Fluorescence washed the room to a blank that should have been comforting. The mirror above the sinks gave me back my face a full second after I arrived. It lagged like a bad call. My reflection moved its eyes late, then hurried to catch up as if embarrassed to be seen slacking. I waved a hand side to side. The reflection waved forward and back, not matching the plane of my motion, more like a puppet learning which strings pull what. Its mouth made a shape. I leaned in. No sound came through the glass, only a thin vibration in my teeth, a secret tapped on the wrong door. I raised my hand to the silvered edge. The other me did the same. Our fingers almost touched, and then my reflection smiled too long and too wide, as if someone had told it to hold the expression until the picture took. The smile flattened. The lips shaped 3 syllables. I could read them without hearing them. Do not sleep. The room's air cooled around my wrists. A stall door clapped shut on the far side of the room, though no steps had crossed the tile. I backed out with my eyes on the glass. The reflection blinked after me, not with me. Fresh night washed my face like cold water, and I felt relief rush in. Then I saw the trucks. Where there had been only my rig a minute earlier, 3 tractors now stood nose toward the building. Engines dead, lights off, paint so clean it looked unscuffed by time. Drivers stood outside, each one. Their hands hung at their sides, their heads tilted at the same small angle. The lot was silent, but the posture of those figures made the silence feel occupied. I lifted a hand in that professional way, the road version of a neighbor nod. None of them returned it. The closest had a hat that cast a shadow where a face should have been. The second wore a jacket I had only seen in old photos, a style that did not belong to this price of fuel. The third looked like me from a distance, same height, same stance. He turned a fraction, and I saw nothing where a reflection should have been in the glass of his truck. I called out. My voice folded over on itself and landed a few feet in front of me like a blanket dropped on the floor. A glass booth stood between the picnic tables and the pet area, a little museum piece from a time when people memorized numbers and trusted coins. A faded out of service tag hung inside like a limp tongue. As I watched, the phone rang. The bell was an honest metal bell, not a recording. The sound made a clean circle in the air. I stepped in before I could decide not to and lifted the receiver. A voice I did not know spoke my name with the kind of ease reserved for someone who has eaten at your table. It said the mirror tells the truth in a way you do not want. It said do not sleep here. It said if you close your eyes, you will dream your truck parked in this lot forever and you will wake up in a different one without a door. I asked who was speaking. The line breathed once, the way a seashell breathes when you hold it to your ear. Then the voice said you almost stayed last time and we do not want you this time. The word we arrived without faces to wear it. The bell rang again, though the receiver was already in my hand. The out-of-service tag twitched as if wind had found it. There was no wind. A sane driver would have rolled out then. Pride and curiosity share a dangerous hand on the wheel. I told myself I would rest my eyes for 10 minutes, no more. Doors locked, windows set, curtains drawn. I let the engine idle because the air had that thin feeling that fog brings just before it shows itself. I slid onto the bunk and listened to the familiar clicks of a machine that has carried my life in boxes for years. The knock came from under the bunk. Not on it. Under. A polite knuckle rap like someone asking for a glass of water in the night. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats again. I held my breath and set my feet on the floor. The knock answered my movement by aligning with it, as if my weight on the floor opened a space where a hand could reach. I unzipped the underbunk compartment and found only the tool roll and the spare fuses. The knock retreated to the far corner of the compartment where no corner should exist. The mirror in the bathroom flashed in my memory. Do not sleep. I sat upright on the bunk with my eyes wide and watched the curtain breathe once on a room with no draft. I did not shut off the idle. I did not check the straps. I slid into the seat, clicked the belt, and rolled. The lot lines tried to cradle the tires back into place. I could feel a soft tug as if the paint had a hand in it. The figures by the trucks turned as one, slow as planets. Their faces remained gentle and empty. I reached the exit and the booth phone rang behind me. The bell sounded closer, then further, then inside the cab near my right ear. I put the hammer down enough to make the gear lever hum. The ramp merged with the highway, and the road embraced me with ordinary dark. In the side mirror, the rest stop hung on the hill like a white ship at anchor. For 1 second, I saw my own rig still parked in the slot I had left, clean and still, lights off, driver window, reflecting the building with a delay. A blink cleared the image. My actual truck carried me forward, engine warm, gauges steady. The sign for Rest Area 19 did not appear on the next green board. The number skipped like a missed tooth. Dawn found me 3 towns later, the kind of dawn that does not make a show of it. The logbook looked regular. The fuel receipt in my pocket bore a station name I recognized, but a second slip hid behind it like a shy twin. It listed a purchase from a vending machine at a location called District Spur. The timestamp matched the minutes I closed my eyes on the bunk. I pulled over at a daytime rest area with cracked benches and cheerful crows. The map on the wall showed sites up and down the state. 18, 20, no 19. A blank space sat where the spur should have drawn a neat loop. For a long time, I stood there and let the ordinary noise of birds and people work at the tight place between my shoulders. When I finally climbed back into the truck, I angled the mirror away until it caught only the road behind me and nothing of me at all. Story 4. The passenger with no destination once. Hitchhikers were part of the road the way mile markers and diners are. You rolled up, you read the weather in their eyes. And if your gut said yes, you opened the door. That custom has thinned to a ghost. Cameras, headlines, and hard lessons taught us to leave the thumb in the mirror where it belongs. Still, there are nights when the shoulder looks like a stage and someone steps into the light because the story needs a listener. Drivers whisper about one rider no one can swear they dropped off. He looks ordinary. He talks like a neighbor you sort of remember. He never says where home is. Everyone agrees on one thing. When you take him in, the road forgets itself for a while. Lanes fold, signs get shy, and your clock makes choices without you. I met him on a winter run, and even now I check the passenger seat before I climb in. The stretch before the county line was empty in a way that felt curated. No liter, no skins. Even the reflector post stood tall and even, as if placed by a careful hand at the same moment. I saw the figure at the limit of my beams and knew immediately he had been waiting only for me. Not for a ride, for me. He wore a dark coat, clean but not new. His shoes were the only bright thing about him, polished to a steady glow. He did not wave. He placed his hand over his heart like he was thanking me before I stopped. While I eased onto the shoulder, he did not hurry. He approached with a precise calm, as if he did not want to spook the truck. Up close, his face was the kind you forget on purpose because it reminds you of too many people at once. He opened the door when I unlocked it, and the cab air thinned a degree like a window had cracked somewhere you cannot see. He settled into the passenger seat with the practiced grace of someone who had done it 1,000 times. He buckled up, hands folded, gaze forward. I pulled back onto the lane. Small talk is a tool in this job. You test the edges. You see what comes back. He asked about the load, the miles, and whether I preferred west routes or east. His voice had a shape that belonged to late-night radio. Easy, level, made for long company. The questions felt harmless until they did not. He asked about an exit that was decommissioned 5 years ago. He asked if the cafe with the scallop pie crust still stayed open after midnight. He asked if the old state cop with the handlebar mustache still camped at the county line. He smiled when I told him those were old stories, and some of them mine. He said the best roads are made of stories because the map only shows where you were, never where you are. We reached a fork I knew by heart. The right branch dipped toward the river. The left climbed a ridge that took an extra 10 minutes, but paid you back with clean lanes. He said take the middle. I laughed before I could stop myself. There is no middle. He nodded without looking at me. There is tonight. The blue of the GPS brightened like it had been woken. A slender line appeared, pale and certain, splitting the difference between the two choices. The sign ahead offered nothing of the sort. Still, my hands turned the wheel as if guided by an older version of me who had already learned this trick. The truck glided into a lane that should not exist. The pavement felt new. The reflectors winked like stars. I checked the mirrors. The lane behind us was a memory, trying to keep up. He pointed ahead, naming landmarks that arrived on cue, then winked out like stage props whisked behind a curtain. He asked me to stop for coffee at a station I did not remember. It sat in a shallow dip, a tidy island of light. The sign out front listed prices that made no sense for this year. The pump stood straight and shy with no ad stuck to their sides. I pulled in because I wanted to see how the illusion worked. He unbuckled and placed his palm on the door, waiting for permission. For a test I did not know I was taking. Inside, the air smelled clean with a sweetness like paper and chalk. Racks were stocked and squared. The counter wore a bell. I pressed it. The sound did not go anywhere. He moved past me to a corner table where a stack of free maps leaned at attention. He picked one up and smoothed it with care. The roads on it were the color of river mud, and they braided in a pattern that would take a day to study. No clerk arrived. No music. Only the hum of lights that never approach a flicker. He unfolded the map and then slid a small envelope from his coat. It was the kind you keep in a desk because you think you will remember what you put inside. He laid out 3 photographs on the table. They were printed on the old map paper that drinks light instead of throwing it back. People filled each frame, not posing so much as tolerating the lens. A family on a porch. A couple at a fair. A man standing by a truck with a logo I had not seen since I was a kid. I recognized nobody and everyone. The more I looked, the more certain I became that I had been behind each camera in a different life. He tapped the corner of one picture where a small shadow lingered that the sun should have erased. He asked if the town name on the back sounded familiar. It did. The vowels tasted like a diner I missed without knowing its address. He smiled like a teacher who sees a student reach the answer sideways. These are places you pass when the road wants to keep you for a while, he said. He guided me back to the highway that was not quite a highway and pointed out a turn only he could see. We entered a town with a bell that chimed from no tower. The main street offered exactly what a memory would order. A barber pole twirled in a window, even though the shop was closed. A theater marquee listed a feature that had never made it to streaming. A laundromat window held a missing sign where a face should have been, only there was a shape like a reflection drawn with a finger on fog. Every street looped hands with another. I would swear I took 3 different turns and arrived at the same corner each time. He watched my confusion with a sympathy that did not help. People moved along the sidewalks in a slow ripple. No one looked at us. No one looked away. We passed a bus stop where a scratched timetable displayed dates without years. He pointed to a bench and told me that sometimes a driver sits there for a while and comes back to their cab with a spare hour they cannot explain. We stopped at the edge of a small park where the grass had the neatness of a postcard. He asked if he could speak plain, and I said please do. He told me he had been riding for a long time. He said rides were the only way the road remembered to show him the exit he missed. He had been headed home once, and the distance could have been measured in a single song, but a wrong turn and a soft voice on his radio led him where the map has no language. He said he never made it to his door, and time learned to bend around him to make the waiting easier. He looked me in the eye for the first time. It felt like looking through a window into a room I used to rent. He said the road is kind or cruel according to the company you keep. He said I was good company. He said if I would drive him as far as the ridge line, he might remember the street where the porch light stays on, just in case. We crossed the town border, and the signs forgot their letters. The road turned honest again. He began a sentence about the color of his mother's kitchen and the melody of his laugh when he was young, and then the cab learned a new emptiness. He was gone, not a trick of eyes, not a shift of shadow, simply the exact absence of a person who had been there a breath ago. The seat held the soft impression of his weight. The belt lay across the fabric like a line on a map that lost its destination. A sound like a coin settling in a jar came from the floorboard. I looked down and saw the small envelope from the station. It had my name on it in a hand that was tidy and old-fashioned. The truck rolled another quarter-mile before I found a shoulder wide enough to stop. When I put us in park, the clock decided it was later than it had been, and the fuel gauge rose a whisper as if thanked. I opened the envelope and found a single photograph. The porch from before. The family again. Only this time a space on the steps looked freshly vacated, and the air there had a texture as if a breeze had been paused in that exact shape. On the back, a number I recognized as a road I had planned to take next week. Below it, 3 words. Do not miss. Again, the map on the dash flashed and corrected itself. The phantom middle lane vanished. The honest fork returned, left and right like it always had been. I took the left up the ridge. The engine sounded pleased. The sky brightened at the rim of the world, just enough to show it remembered how. When I passed the mile where he had first stood, the shoulder looked ordinary in a way that fell hard-won. A pair of shoe prints briefly held shape in the gravel before the wind groomed them smooth. My radio clicked. Static breathed once, then nothing. Sometimes silence is the best proof you get. At the next town, I pulled into a diner with a cracked mural of a river on the sidewall. The waitress poured coffee and called me Han like she was repairing something small and important. I slipped the photograph from the envelope and set it face down on the counter. The number on the back matched the road that would carry me toward a delivery and away from a loop that could have kept me forever. A smear of porch paint clung to the edge of the card like it had been wet an hour ago. On my way out, I checked the rack by the door. A free map offered the county routes in tiny print. Someone had circled a street in pencil where the ridge drops into town. Beside it, a little note said porch light. Not my handwriting, not anyone's I knew. I folded the map and kept it. Some passengers get where they are going in pieces. Some rides never end. They only change drivers. Story 5. The way station that wasn't their routine is a driver's favorite lullaby. You learn the timing of the lights, the rattle of the ramps, and the way a scales hum climbs right before it settles. Way stations are part of that rhythm. Roll in, stop on the diamond, get your green or your red. Maybe chat with a clerk who has seen every road trick twice. The ritual keeps the mind steady. It reminds you the highway still has rules. There is a second ritual that no one writes down. It is the one that starts when signs appear you have never seen and the radio grows shy. Some drivers whisper about a station that moves. They say it looks new, smells of fresh paint, and opens only for people who are already tired enough to believe in it. The strangest part is not the lights or the glass. It is the way the place asks questions about roads you do not remember taking. One winter night, I followed those questions off an exit that did not exist 12 hours later. My run that night should have been simple. 2 pallets of electronics strapped neat, a delivery that preferred early mornings, and a slice of highway I could drive with my eyes closed if I were foolish enough to try. The regular station sat 30 miles past the ridge, and it behaved like a clock. Lanes marked, cones aligned, clerks who said good evening like they were setting a table in their own house. I settled into the rhythm. Engine smooth, tires singing. The column of light from my beams felt like a tunnel where thoughts could slip by without snagging. Then the pull began, a soft tug at the corner of my attention, the kind you feel when a familiar song drifts in from a radio in another room. I told myself it was hunger. I told myself it was the kind of boredom that builds stories out of reflections. Still, when a green board announced a way station 5 miles ahead, I caught myself nodding as if someone had just given me directions I was already following. The first board should have been a comfort. Prepare to stop. Way station open. The font looked correct. The placement was textbook. Only there had never been a station on that stretch. My atlas did not show it. My memory did not know it. Yet the next sign repeated the promise and added a detail. Inspection bay ahead. The word inspection sat there like a lead weight in my belly. The CB woke enough to let a driver mutter that the regular station was closed for maintenance. Another voice tried to answer, then thought better of it. My hand were calm on the wheel, but my breathing changed tempo. A third board appeared. Last exit before way station. I could have ignored it. I could have rolled on and let whatever test waited for me meet me where I always met it. I signaled for the ramp because the pull had changed from suggestion to a hand on my shoulder, guiding me gently where I was already leaning. The approach lane was so new the reflectors looked wet. The building rose out of the dark like a sketch that someone had inked an hour ago. Glass walls, bright lobby, a roofline with clean edges that had not yet learned how to collect leaves. The lot was spotless. No chalky arch from last week's rain. No dark drops of diesel. The air smelled sharp, like cut plastic and hot wires cooling. I rolled toward the platform and noticed how still everything was. Not empty. Still. The sodium poles hummed with a steady tone that did not waver. The red over green signals perched above the lanes showed both colors at once, as if unwilling to choose. A banner in the window said grand opening even though there was no date under the letters. I could make out clipboards on a counter in the lobby and a bulletin board pinned with notices that had no words, only lines that looked like writing from too far away. My tires climbed the steel deck of the scale, and the truck settled into silence, as if listening. Digital numbers woke on the display like eyes opening. They flickered rapid, then held. The weight was right for my load and fuel. I relaxed a notch. The numbers slid. They dipped to a value that belonged to an empty trailer. They surged to a number that would have snapped my axles. Then the digits began to form letters. I rubbed a knuckle under my eye because the trick was so obvious it almost made me laugh. The letters did not care. They arranged themselves into my last name, then my first, then a road I took 3 summers ago when a detour forced me across a bridge I still dream about. The speaker by the light clicked. A voice told me to proceed to the inspection bay. The tone carried the genial boredom of a clerk who has seen it all. I wanted that boredom to be real. I wanted a human behind the glass doing paperwork and listening for footsteps. The numbers shifted once more, made a short sentence I did not like, and cleared to 0. The words were simple and too familiar. You skipped us. I rolled off the deck and followed the line, painted so white it glowed. The bay door lifted the way a blinking eye reveals a pupil. Inside, the light was brighter than the lot, yet it felt diffused, the way a dream pretends that glare has no edges. Racks of tools lined the walls. Most of them made sense. Torque wrenches, tire irons, a scale for handheld weights. Others refused reality by a hair. A gauge with 4 needles, but no numbers. A clipboard that held a form where the boxes were perfect squares waiting to be filled with shapes that were not letters. A sign on the far wall promised a 10-minute inspection if I had my documents ready. Another sign promised the same in exchange for exact change. The coexistence made my mouth go dry. The overhead speaker coughed politely. "Pull forward, driver. Stop on the diamond." I did as told. My dash lights reflected in the bay window with the tiniest delay, like the glass had to remember what red meant before it could return the color to me. He appeared behind the glass without entering the frame. One moment the window showed the empty counter. The next it held a man in a pale shirt with a perfectly flat collar. His hair was neat without being current. His smile was trained on the center of my forehead instead of my eyes. He lifted a pen and it left no shadow on the counter. Papers were arrayed in front of him, all crisp, all white, none bearing a logo or a letter. "License and logbook, please." I held them up. He did not reach. He angled his head, then asked me where I had been on a date that did not exist. He asked how many miles I had run on a route that had been closed for construction since before I bought this truck. He asked if I still used the handle I had only tried twice on a channel I no longer visit. My answers landed in the bay like leaves. He smiled at the leaves the way a teacher smiles at a child who has colored inside the lines but chosen the wrong picture. Movement in my side mirror made me breathe again. A rig took the lane behind me with the careful patience of a driver who respects steel and momentum. Another slid into the next bay. A third idled outside the doors, its turn signals blinking at a tempo older than the current code. Their paint was clean in the way of vehicles kept under a roof. Their company names were familiar if you collected old photographs. I watched a driver climb from a cab with a door handle mounted too low for anything made in the last 20 years. His boots made no sound on the concrete. He joined a short line at the glass without looking left or right. Their faces were clear and not entirely present, like portraits that had been polished until the eyes forgot how to catch light. One nodded at me. The nod landed a second late, as if he were remembering how to return a courtesy. The clerk took a form from no stack and stamped it with a seal that was all circle and no emblem. Each driver accepted the stamp with a gratitude that made my skin try to leave my bones. I eased toward the outbound gate on habit and hope. It read my motion and lifted 2 inches. The red light above it remained red. The speaker sighed. "Driver, you have not paid your miles." My chest tightened the way it does when a storm line convinces the truck it is a sale. I asked what that meant. The answer came like a customer service script recited by someone who had never met a customer. "You missed the station when it opened on your route. You owed a stop and an answer. Tonight we are collecting." I tried to laugh. It came out thin. I offered a roll to the regular station down the line. The voice said that one is not open for you. I asked the fee. The light brightened, pleased by the question. "You pay in routes. You pay in time. You pay in the distance between the mile you remember and the mile you deny." The gate did not rise. The mirror showed the other trucks waiting with the patience of churches. 2 choices presented themselves. Wait for a rule I did not understand to recognize me, or force my way out before the place decided to grow roots around my axles. My hands picked the second before my thoughts did. I straightened the wheel, breathed once to quiet the shake in my arms, and fed the truck the kind of throttle that feels like an apology you will send later. The gate lifted another inch, as if surprised. The bumper kissed the bar. Metal squealed like a violin string tuned too tight. The arm jumped, hesitated, and then swung up with a snap that sounded like a door giving way in an old house. The bay lights did not change. The clerk's window remained calmly bright. In a mirror, the other trucks held their places, their turn signals continuing their patient blink. As my tires found the exit ramp, the lot behind me dimmed by a fraction, like a room where someone begins to close their eyes. The station shrank into the dark, and for a heartbeat, I saw only pure glass and clean lines. Then the hill folded it away as if it had been a picture tucked back into a book. The highway's ordinary sounds greeted me like family. I kept one hand on the wheel and one on the shifter long after I was clear, as if muscle could keep me anchored to the real lane. The regular way station appeared 40 minutes later. Closed. Cones set. A sign taped to the window said back at 7 in handwriting that looked pleasantly human. I pulled into the next truck stop and let the engine tick while it cooled its nerves and mine. Inside, the receipt printer coughed out my fuel slip, then pushed a second paper after it. The header listed a station I had never visited. The total read paid in full. The footer carried a message instead of a survey link. You're square for now. My atlas showed no new facility on that route when I checked it over coffee. No one on the radio had a story to trade. By noon, the tug on my shoulder was gone. That night, I filed the extra receipt behind my registration, where I keep proof that the road sometimes keeps score in columns you cannot see. Story 6. Convoy and reverse convoys are the heartbeat of lonely highways. You see a set of markers in your mirror and feel less alone. There is comfort in two rigs breathing the same air and catching the same green. A convoy can carry you through bad weather and worse thoughts. It keeps your lane honest and your mind awake. There is a rumor drivers pass like a coin with a hole drilled through it. Some swear there's a convoy that moves backward, trucks rolling tail first, headlights looking like eyes placed on the wrong side of a face. They say the CB sounds strange when it is near. They say mile markers count down and the clock gets shy. I did not believe it. I did not want to. Then one winter night, the mirror taught me a lesson I did not ask to learn. The run began with that quiet only a long stretch can make. The rhythm was right. The engine wore its calm like a well-fitted jacket. I kept the cruise steady and let the white lines do their little vanishing act at the edge of the light. The world smelled like cold metal and pine, and the sky had that color that only makes sense at 2 in the morning. Something was missing, and it took me a few miles to name it. There was no one else out here. No distant glow. No stray sedan that swings into your lane and out again like a curious fish. Even the Animal Crossings looked undecided. No eyes in the grass. No flash of a tail. It felt like I had gotten to the road before the world remembered to put life on it. My mirrors showed only the twin red dots of my own trailer. I told myself to enjoy the peace. The road had other plans. The mirrors began whispering light. Not bright, not close, just a suggestion. A shimmer like heat haze without the heat. At first, I thought it was instrument glare or a star low on the horizon. Then the shimmer thickened and separated into two pale beads where no beads should be. They did not quite sit where headlights belong. They did not quite sit where taillights belong either. The dots swam closer with the slow calm of a thing that knows it will reach you. I eased off the cruise half a notch and the dots matched me without effort. The left bead drifted right when it should have drifted left. That was the first rule broken. The second rule broke when the glow brightened with the pitch of reverse lights. I checked my gear indicator just to feel sane. The lever sat where it should. The engine hummed forward. The road said otherwise. They formed like a picture coming up in a dark room. One rig, then two, then five. Each one tail first. Trailers led like steel sleds, and tractors followed like shadows trying to catch up. Their brake lamps shone the way eyes shine in a photograph when the flash disagrees with them. The rigs moved with a grace that made my head want to tilt the other way to make it make sense. Their engines carried a tone I did not know. Not idle, not pull, a neat and patient hum that felt like a song played backward. I could feel the notes in my ribs. They settled in around me without closing distance. One on my left shoulder and a step back. One on my right. A pair behind at the angle where friends would ride. Their spacing was perfect. Their trucks wore liveries I half remembered. Names of companies that had folded. Logos no longer printed. The road became a room with the furniture set in reverse. The CB clicked to life as if an unseen hand had pressed a button. A voice rose out of the static like a submerged thing taking a breath. Words arrived backward. Syllables slid into my ears the wrong way and then unstitched themselves into sense. I caught my own handle, then my name, then a route number I had not said aloud in years. It felt like hearing a recording of myself from a night I had forgotten. I turned the knob by reflex and the channels fell past like cards. Every stop gave me the same voice. It spoke as if it had been taped and then played in reverse through a machine that did not mind breaking rules. Then the voice used my mother's tone to tell me to slow down. I felt my foot lift without my permission. The speaker gave a little pop, and the air in the cab went thin at the edges. I said into the mic that I was not interested. My words came out ordinary. The echo that returned carried them back to me, backward and colder. The first mile marker that told the truth said 59. I logged it out of habit. The next should have read 60. It read 58. The third said 57 and sat where I had never seen it sit. The shoulder grass looked as if a wind had combed it the wrong way. I checked my odometer. The digits counted down. They clicked in clean little bites like they enjoyed the job. I told myself it was a fault in the cluster. I told myself it was a trick of reflection. Then the reflective tape on the guardrail rolled backward through my beams like fish schooling away from a net. The convoy kept its patient formation. Their lights did the small shiver that lights do over hammered steel. The hum of their engines found a note that made my fillings ache. I gripped the wheel and picked a lane like a prayer. Every convoy has a mind. This one had a body too. It showed itself as a larger shape a few car lengths ahead. The trailer was taller by a head. The tractor was a silhouette that belonged to a model I had only seen in books. The paint was the dark of a whetstone. A small emblem sat dead center at the trailer's rear door. A circle with lines that did not resolve into letters. The driver window framed a figure. Not a face, a presence. I knew I was seen because the brake lamps brightened a shade and held there, not a tap, not a warning, a greeting without warmth. A hand rose. Palms face the past when you wave in reverse. The gesture was slow and exact. It felt like a request to come back the way I had come. I could almost believe the road behind me was easier. I could almost believe I had missed something that waited with the patience of water-cutting stone. I signaled a lane change like manners still mattered. The rig on my left slid a breath to keep me honest. The one on my right matched with an eager precision that made my teeth hurt. I tried again and fed the truck a little power. They breathed with me and kept the box around my nose just wide enough to be polite and just tight enough to feel like a collar. I touched the brakes and the space behind me filled before my foot found the pedal. The leader ahead lifted as if too light to be real and then came down with the same gentle way. The CB whispered my name backward again. The syllables scratched along my spine. I chose the shoulder without signaling. Gravel ticked the fenders and the rigs adjusted to make the shoulder into a lane that belonged to them. The highway had become a puzzle that refused my shape. The road gave up pretending. The white lines unzipped and stitched themselves behind my bumper. Signs turned a neat flip like cards. The green boards flash place names that belonged to an hour ago. A billboard unpeeled to an older message and then an older one still. The sky learned to unbrighten, squeezing dawn out of the edge of it like toothpaste backwards into the tube. The clock on my dash shivered and chose a number that had already happened. Under it all, the hum of the convoy carried the same sure note. I watched the leader and saw the emblem on the door stutter into clarity. It was not letters. It was a clock face with no hands. The window shape shifted, and for a blink, I saw my own outline seated there. My breath hitched, and the glass forgot to fog. The radio gave a single crisp chirp, like a bird practicing notes. I heard my own voice say, "Do not follow." Only the sound arrived like the end of a word with the beginning swallowed. Sometimes steel and wool are the only tools you have. I picked a seam where the left shoulder widened to a shallow pull-off for maintenance. I downshifted and found the gear that lets a heavy thing leap like it is light. The trailer tugged once, offended. I kept my foot where it needed to be and let the engine ride a line the convoy could not erase. The nearest rig moved to box me and missed by the width of a mirror. The leader's brake lamps flared to a white that red should never reach. For an instant, the trucks around me lost their neat edges. The hum broke into a snow of sound. The world made a soft, tearing noise, a paper rip, a stitch undone. I punched through the seam and felt the tires climb a ripple in the asphalt that had not been there a second before. Then the road made its ordinary sound again. Wind, rubber, a friendly little rattle from a coin in the cup holder. The mirrors went empty the way a stage goes dark. The clock chose a time 2 hours later than it had been. My log looked honest, except for a neat blank where fear should go. The mile marker ahead read 61. The next read, 62. The odometer remembered its job and counted the right way. In the rear view, a single pale bead hung back at the edge of sight like a star that will not admit it is morning. It winked once. It learned to be tail light again. I set the cruise and touched the mic with 2 fingers like a greeting. Silence answered in a way that felt kind. I breathed out the long breath I had been holding since the first shimmer found me. Story 7. The long haul to nowhere, getting lost on a highway, does not happen the way city people think it does. It is not a wrong left and a quick U-turn. Out here, getting lost means the road decides what you will remember. It trades your certainty for the comfort of repetition. A sign you passed once shows up again with the same missing bolt. A diner you know closed years ago sits warm and lit like it never learned how to quit. After a while, you stop trusting the map and start listening for the way your engine changes when the world tilts. Drivers whisper about routes that do not return you. They say you can run a full night and never reach a new mile. They say you burn fuel that does not drop the gauge and still cannot explain where the hours went. The stories always end the same. Someone found a turn that did not look like a turn at all. They took it because the road smiled and said please. The run should have been easy. Food staples wrapped in clean plastic and stacked to waist height. A night start with a dawn finish and a generous buffer in the middle. My cab felt like a small apartment with the heater just right. I had a thermos and a sandwich and a playlist that was 3 hours too long for the miles ahead. The plan was to let the truck carry me while my mind jogged along beside it. The first sign repeated innocently. Exit 42, 2 miles. Then exit 42, 2 miles again. I noted the oddity and smiled at my own superstition. The second time I passed the same state trooper turnoff, my smile thinned. Third time, my shoulders climbed. The radio remained polite, as if it knew better than to break the spell. The lane felt smoother than usual, like fresh seal. The white stripes looked hand-painted. Each one was perfect, and that perfection began to feel like a lie told by someone who wanted to see how long I would nod along. It arrived between blinks. A clean sign with a place name I knew, mounted on brackets with no rust, and a number that belonged farther down the route. The arrow pointed left into a curve that did not exist on my map or in my bones. Still, my hands followed. The turn lane opened, as if it had been waiting behind a curtain. The ramp dropped into a shallow bowl of quiet. My GPS hesitated, then chose to believe me. The blue line jumped to meet the path like a dog that does not know a trick is coming. The fuel gauge twitched. Not down, not up, a sideways shiver, like a breath through teeth. The needle settled exactly where it had been, and that was worse than a drop. A new billboard welcomed me to a town I associated with summer fireworks and dusty parades. The picture looked right. The colors were too calm. I touched the glass of a GPS and felt a hum that did not belong to electronics. It felt like the thrum you feel standing on a bridge when a river insists on its own direction. Lights burned in every storefront. Window signs flipped to open in neat red letters. A barbershop pole turned at the lazy speed of a cat stretching on a windowsill. A bus rolled past with empty seats and a driver who did not look left or right. I eased the rig down the main street and waited for a jaywalker to make me tap the brakes. No one crossed. No one looked up. The town lived like a picture in a frame that someone dusts every hour. The grocery doors slid aside with obedient grace. Inside, the produce looked like it had been arranged for a photograph. Every apple wore a shine that did not pick up fingerprints. The coolers hummed a righteous tone. I said hello to the air, and it gave me back my voice 1 second late, as if a person behind the shelf were learning how to imitate me. I left the cart where I found it and returned to the cab with nothing but a feeling that I had been blessed and dismissed in the same gesture. The GPS marked a highway that did not exist beyond the next light. It drew a cheerful path across empty lots and told me to turn where a diner sat with a neon sign, spelling a name I knew from my childhood. The paper atlas on the passenger seat disagreed. It insisted the town ended in 3 blocks, and the only road out was the one I had entered on. I unfolded both, propped them so I could glance without drifting, and drove slowly like a man moving through his own old house in the dark. At the third light, the GPS offered a reroute that curled back on itself. The paper map turned smug and useless, its lines suddenly meaning nothing to the way my eyes measured distance. I chose the street that looked the most ordinary. The truck approved with a soft shift of weight. The radio tried a burst of static, then swallowed it. In the corner of the windshield, a moth paced the glass from the inside, which made no sense because I had not opened the cab since the last stop. A small station sat at the edge of town, the kind built when unleaded was still something you announced. The canopy lights shone warm and steady. The pumps had the square shoulders of older machines and the kind of decals that time usually curls, except these were flat and clean. Inside, the attendant looked as if he had been poured into his chair. Not old, not young, not quite in any decade I know. He blinked when I entered, like a slide projector changing pictures. I asked for directions back to the highway. He said, "Do not drive too far," and smiled. It was the smile of a man who has practiced one expression for years because no one asked for another. I asked again. He lifted a hand and pointed toward the windows, then lowered it and pointed toward the floor. The motion felt like an answer in a language my bones should have known. He rang up a coffee I did not remember taking and placed a receipt on the counter that listed a timestamp 3 hours in the future. He said again, "Do not drive too far," and this time I understood that the warning did not care which direction I chose. Back on the road, the truck settled into a loop it pretended not to enjoy. A red barn with a star on its siding turned up, then turned up again from a new angle, then again as if the hill had spun beneath it. A billboard bragged about a county fair that had ended 2 weeks before I was born. I drove past the silver water tower 3 times, and each time the tag at its base shifted one character, like a combination lock trying words. The lane kept its kindness. No potholes, no sloppy repairs. The shoulder looked brushed. The mile markers gave me the same number with polite variations, a 3 leaning left, a 3 leaning right, a 3 exactly straight. I set the cruise to a number I trust when I need to think. The gauge needles held steady like good dogs. A moment arrived when I realized the loop would continue for as long as I offered it my patience. I tasted copper and decided to be rude. He sat on the apron of a closed repair shop with his back to a roll-up door and his hands folded, like a preacher waiting for the first parishioner. His truck was parked perfectly parallel to a line no one could see. The paint on his cab had the rich sheen of a careful wash, yet the style belonged to a catalog I had not flipped through in decades. His hat brim curved exactly as if it had been taut. He watched me without lifting his chin. I rolled the window and asked if he needed a hand. He said he had needed one for years, then corrected himself and said years is not the right word when the road forgets them. He told me he had been driving for decades and had not aged a day since he missed the exit that took him home. He described the same loops I had just learned, the same repeating barns, the same moth pacing the windshield. He asked if my cargo had stayed honest. I told him yes because I had not checked. He looked relieved for me, not convinced. Back at the trailer, I broke my own rule about seals and schedules. I cut the plastic with a neat triangle so I could tape it back without leaving a scar. The door rolled up like a curtain, revealing a stage set. My pallets were where they should be, stretch wrapped tight, corners true. Only the labels wore a different font, and the company name had shifted to an older version that had not been used since the founder retired. A stamp on one box listed a date in a format that belonged to another country. I opened a carton and found cans that looked correct and not correct. The logo was a cousin of the one I knew. The ingredients used a word that had been legally removed from packaging in my state 10 years ago. The bills of lading in my folder had learned the same trick. Lines had slid, numbers had kept their shapes and changed their meanings. I closed the box and the door and told myself aloud that we were leaving. The we landed heavy in the quiet and made me glad to hear a voice, even if it was mine. It hid between 2 guide rails where a drainage cut widened into a suggestion of road. Dirt, packed and pale, with 2 grooves like an invitation for exactly one kind of wheelbase. No sign, no promise. It ran away from a loop at a humble angle. like a footpath that had not learned the courage of pavement. My hands found the turn with the relief of someone locating a light switch in a dark room they used to live in. The truck complained once in the language of suspension and then agreed. Gravel pattered the undercarriage like welcoming rain. The trees closed in, but the air grew honest. My mirrors showed only leaves and a tall slice of sky. For the first time since the first repeating sign, the fuel needle moved gently downward on a curve that made sense to the miles. A black dog watched from the ditch with the solemnity of an usher. The path tipped upward, and I saw a strip of real highway through the branches, gray and imperfect and beautiful. I burst on the shoulder like a swimmer breaking through to air. The rig wobbled and recovered, and the lane greeted me with a rumble strip that felt like applause. The first sign I passed was sun-faded and honest about its distance. The next was dented by a careless mower. The odometer remembered which way to count. I checked the dash clock and felt my stomach drop. 2 days had slipped away while the sky had insisted it was still night. My delivery window was gone. My dispatch board pinged with messages that stacked like cards. I called in and said I had trouble with a closure. It was not a lie and not the truth. The receiver rescheduled without asking for details, which felt like a kindness and a warning. In the glove box, a new paper waited beside the bills of lading. It was a receipt printed on thin stock, the kind that fades to blank if you breathe on it. The header read County Road Maintenance. The item line read Turn Reopened. The total showed 0. I folded it into the atlas where I keep proof that some miles return you only when you offend them. Story 8. Exit 13 never ends. Exit numbers are anchors when the night goes soft around the edges. You count them like beads and let the road thread them for you. 12, 13, 14. Each one promises a way out if you need it. Gas, food, an hour of sleep with the engine ticking like a friendly clock. Most exits keep their promises. A few do not. Drivers whisper about one ramp in particular. Exit 13. Some say it is cursed. Others say it is a simple mistake the highway refuses to correct. They agree on this much. If you take it after midnight, it will not let you go. The ramp stretches. The signs change their minds. You end up where you started, only older in a way that does not show on your face. I did not plan to learn whether that was true. The road had other ideas. I was hunting a cup of coffee that tasted like more than hot water and a promise. The green board lifted out of the dark with that confident font. Exit 13. Services. A little gas logo glowed like a friendly wink. I flicked the signal and felt the truck relax a hair, glad for a break from the straight line. The ramp began normally. Concrete with the usual hairline cracks. Reflectors bright and cheerful. My beams painted the curve, and I committed. Halfway down, the grade softened into a glide that felt longer than it should. The signs on the post looked fresh. No stickers, no bullet holes, no sun fade. That was the first wrong note. Most ramps have a history you can read if you look. This one looked like it had been printed from memory. The spiral carried me right, then right again. The alignments felt identical, as if the ramp were tracing its own path over and over, waiting to see if I would notice. On the inside wall, someone had painted a small fish near the base, a little silver flash of a thing pointing the way. I smiled at the harmless detail until I saw the same fish again 2 bends later, and then again where no paint crew should have been able to reach without closing the whole lane. I marked a drain grate that had lost a bolt. 10 seconds later, I passed it again, the missing bolt still missing, the grass tuft beside it the same stubborn tilt. My stomach learned a new drop that had nothing to do with grade. I tapped the brakes to test the reality under me. The pedal felt solid. The truck agreed that we were moving forward. The ramp did not. The ramp opened onto a small service loop with a gas station planted neatly at the center. The canopy lights were clean white, and the pumps gleamed like a dentist's tools. I pulled into the outer lane and saw a rack of windshield fluid shaped like a pyramid with no chips in the edges. Inside, a cashier stood behind glass and smiled with the exact smile you see on training posters. I checked my mirror out of habit, and my breath tightened. The station was gone in the glass. Not dim. Gone. The ramp stood there instead, curling away like a ribbon tossed onto a table. I looked forward again, and the station returned, bright and ordinary. I eased around the loop and saw my own tire tracks in the dust like proof I had been here before. The cashier's smile did not change. The pumps showed a price I had not paid in 10 years, and the numbers did not flip when the wind grazed the display. Back on the loop, a new overhead sign waited at truck height. It should have said exit to highway. Instead, the letters arranged themselves into my name. For a second, I thought it was a trick of reflection. Then the sign changed again. Driver, keep right. The vowels rolled across the board the way your own thoughts roll when you pretend you are not afraid. I swallowed and kept right. Another board promised coffee hot and drew a little steam curl. As I approached, the words slid like magnets across a fridge. Do not stop. The curl straightened into a finger pointing toward the ramp. A smaller panel near the curb whispered in tiny letters I had to squint to read. You have been here before. The message crawled away as if embarrassed to be caught helping. The truck idled with a friendly note that made me feel braver than I deserve. The loop offered a motel with a vacancy sign that glowed red like a heartbeat under skin. The building had the cheap symmetry of a place that charges by the hour and apologizes by the day. Every room wore a number stenciled neat on the center of the door. I parked across the office and walked up for the desk bell. While I reached for the handle, I touched wood. There were no handles. Each door presented a perfect face with a number and no way in. I knocked on one just to hear a sound. The knock came back late from the end of the hallway inside, as if the room led to a longer space that did not want visitors. The office window showed a desk bell and a plant that looked real enough to die and nothing else. The vacancy sign brightened for a pulse and dimmed. I backed away with the clean and precise certainty that no one had slept here and everyone had tried. At the head of the ramp, a man stood with his thumb down instead of up. He wore a jacket the color of fresh asphalt and boots that had been polished this century. He did not smile, but his eyes had the look of someone grateful to see a face. I rolled the window, and he stepped closer without closing distance, like a figure seen through rain. I have been trying to leave for years, he said. His voice carried the exhaustion of a teacher on the last day of school. He told me he worked at the gas station when the station was new and the cashier's smile had not yet become a mask. He took the ramp after a late shift because his wife made good coffee and the baby would be awake. He's been trying to reach that kitchen since. Sometimes a truck gets through when the signs forget to guard the way. He asked if I'd seen the motel. He asked if the doors were still shy. The GPS spun a neat circle in the corner of the dash, a blue triangle rotating like a dancer with no floor. The compass beside it refused to pick a letter. North flickered. East tried and failed. West took a turn out of pity. The needle settled on a point that did not correspond to sky or map. The hitchhiker watched the dance with the resignation of a man who has already memorized the steps. He said the trick is to ignore all the help. No GPS, no arrows, no friendly words. The ramp is not like certainty. It prefers a driver who remembers how to feel a grade with the seat of the body and read wind off the mirrors. He told me to count the breaths between curve and curve and to steer for the place where my pulse fell into rhythm with the truck. I laughed without humor and asked how often that works. He said it had never worked for him, but he hoped it would work for me. I circled once more and the loop settled into the role of a bored host. The station remained where it wanted to be when I looked straight at it. The motel stared without blinking. The overhead boards spelled words in a language my fear could understand. At the end of the sweep, the ramp waited with the same tilt and the same fish painted at its base. I set my hands on the wheel as if they were keys I did not want to drop. Time loosened. The dash clock ticked obediently and meant nothing. The hitchhiker stood in the mirror, waving his thumb down, and I could not bring myself to stop. I aimed for the seam between my heartbeat and the engine's note. The ramp felt the decision and tried to lengthen again, but something in the grade hesitated, like a shadow, remembering it belonged to a body. I fed the truck power as if telling a story to a child who needs a happy ending. The turbo sang the small song it sings when it believes in the lane ahead. The fish mark flickered past and did not return. The drain grate with the missing bolt arrived in the wrong place and then fell behind. offended. The overhead sign made one last attempt to write my name and chose instead a blank that looked like surrender. The ramp steepened without warning. The weight pressed me back, and the engine answered with that satisfied note you hear when a climb is honest. The concrete changed color under the lights. New gray became old gray. Old gray became a mosaic of repairs and patches that meant men had worked here and cursed here and eaten sandwiches on these very curves. The loop released me in a straight line that joined a highway with trucks on it. Real trucks, living drivers, flawed paint, and loud radios. The atlas in the passenger seat showed exits 12 and 14 with a tidy gap where 13 should have been. The index printed a small apology. Number retired. The GPS recovered enough to draw the road I was already on and pretended it had known better the whole time. I pulled into a busy plaza 2 miles later and let the crowd noise warm the cab. At the counter, I paid for coffee, and the receipt printer offered me a second slip. It showed the logo of a station I had never heard of with an address that listed no town. The line item read one night, and the amount was 0. On the back, in light ink, someone had written 3 words that looked like mine if I were more tired than I knew. Do not look back. I folded it into my logbook and drove on without checking the mirror. Story 9. Freight that knocked from inside a seal trailer is a promise. Once those doors swing shut and a numbered tag clicks into place, the world outside cannot touch what is inside. Drivers live by that comfort. Freight is quiet. Freight is obedient. Freight does not ask questions. When something thumps back there, you tell yourself it is pallet shift or a loose strap whispering against corrugate. You do not picture fingers. Still, there's a kind of story that sticks to the spine. Freight that taps at regular intervals. Freight that waits to knock until the moment you drift towards sleep. Warehouse folks who avoid eye contact and rush the paperwork like they're trying to hand you a dream they want to forget. I picked up a load that looked neat on paper and felt wrong by the time the dock plate lifted. The first knock came 10 miles later, polite as a neighbor and patient as rain. Pickup was at a distribution center that always smelled like cold cardboard and lift grease. The clerk did not ask about my route. She flipped the clipboard and slid a pen toward me. Eyes on the wall clock like someone waiting for a door to unlock. The bills of lading listed dry goods in plain language. Boxed fixtures. Non perishable. No afmat. The kind of load you forget by lunch the next day. On the dock, the crew worked with the efficiency of people who wanted the scene to end. Pallets rolled smoothly. Wrap crackled. A warehouseman in a knit cap guided the forklift with delicate wrists. He avoided looking down the length of my trailer once the first stack crossed the threshold. Another man taped the last pallet with 3 turns too many. When the seal came out, the cap man called the number before the tag, even clicked. His voice was steady and too loud. The door shut. The dock light turned from red to green. I felt like a curtain had dropped between me and an audience that did not want an encore. The highway opened like a fresh page. I settled into the groove and let the mirrors write the same picture over and over. The first knock arrived during a song I know by heart, right at the bar where the chorus drops. 3 crisp taps from behind the rear axle. Not the heavy thud of true shift. Not the hollow boom of a pallet kissing the wall. Knuckles on wood. Careful and hopeful. I told myself it was expansion rattle from the floor slats. Cold, dry nights will do that. I turned the volume up a notch and watched the white lines with a serenity I did not feel. A mile later, the taps came again. Same measure, same space between beats. I flexed my fingers on the wheel and felt a muscle twitch in my forearm, like it wanted to throw a signal to the trailer. The radio stayed quiet. Traffic stayed sparse. The road looked innocent. Knocks become language when they refuse to be random. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. 3 again. It repeated through the county line and over the ridge. I began to count the beats under my breath without meaning to. In the quiet between truck and wind, the pattern took on a shape my mind tried to read. A simple code, the kind you learned as a kid with a flashlight under a blanket. At a long light, I let the cab idle and cracked the window to listen. The sound carried clean, not muffled by cardboard or shrink wrap. It felt close to the doors, like someone had learned where the echo was best. 3, 2, 3. I checked the paperwork again, hoping to find any excuse for a loose part. Every line looked right. The shipper address and the receiver address sat on the page like two towns having a polite argument. When a light changed, the knocks changed with it, as if whoever was making the sound could feel the truck lean back into motion. I chose a well-lit rest area with cameras and company, the kind of place where fear looks foolish in daylight memory. I parked nose out and killed the radio. The engine ticked down. The night breathed in around the hood. Drivers milled under the lamps with coffee and quiet. I waited. Talp, talp, talp. The same measure, soft as if not to wake the neighbors. A reefer unit at the far end coughed into life, and a seated driver stood, looked my way, then drifted to a different space like a bird avoiding a wire. A couple in a day cab finished their conversation mid-sentence and pulled off. Some places are allergic to certain sounds. The knocks did not grow louder. They did not grow shy. They kept their patience and their manners, and that frightened me more than a shout would have. Breaking a seal without authorization is the fastest way to buy trouble you cannot afford. I walked back anyway. The metal strip shone under the lamp like a ring on a reluctant hand. I read the number aloud to prove I was still in charge of this night. It did not match the copy on my bills. Off by one digit in the middle, not a transposed pair. A different number, cleanly printed. My stomach cooled. I palmed the tag to feel the crimp. It had the smoothness of a fresh bite. No signs of tamper. No scratch near the hasp. No price scar on the paint. Inside the doors, only silence answered the taps, like a person holding their breath when they hear your shoes approach. My phone camera caught the seal and the mismatch. I took a second photo, because once is never enough when your nerves are hosting a meeting. Walking back to the cab, I felt the trailer's skin give the smallest inward flex, as if a palm had tested the distance between us. I told myself I would rest the eyes for 10 minutes. Curtains closed, doors locked, alarm set. The cot accepted my weight like a confidant. The knocking answered by moving. It stepped out of the trailer and into the cab without making any of the sound it should have made. It arrived under the bunk with the soft confidence of a cat that knows the house. 3 taps. 2, 3. The rhythm held. The source had changed. The curtain breathed as if someone had exhaled an inch from the fabric. I held my own breath and felt the thin space fill with attention. A whisper rose, not words, the shape of words, like lips forming syllables for a language the air had forgotten. My alarm blinked to the halfway mark, and the display fogged, as if from breath. I sat upright, and the knocking moved with me, closer to where my feet met the floor. I said out loud that we were not doing this here. The knocking stopped long enough for the silence to decide it preferred the knocking after all. There's a point where a rule yields to a different rule. If a person is in your trailer, you choose the human before you choose the paperwork. I took the bolt cutters from the side box and felt the weight in my hands like a verdict. The cold bit the handles. I stood at the doors and listened. The tap slowed, as if counting with me. I told myself I would cut, look, and reseal with the spare in my kit. I told myself I would write a tight paragraph in the remarks field and apologize to dispatch in the morning. The whispers gathered behind the steel, a hush of presence. Not pleading, not threat, waiting. I raised the cutters and the night leaned in. The jaws closed and the strip sheared with a sound like a small animal biting through candy. The tag fell into my palm with a surprising warmth. For a second, the trailer skin went utterly still. Then something inside shifted like fabric, deciding to be a shape. I lifted the latch and let the door teach me how heavy it was. Cold air rolled out first. Not the weather's cold. A cellar cold. A long hallway cold. The beam of my flashlight walked the rows. Pallets stood where pallets should stand. Only the shrink wrap did not reflect properly. It drank the light. The cartons under it had no logos. No barcodes. Each box wore a small square of darker color where a label should have been, like a stamp removed from a letter with steam. I stepped up onto the bumper and listened. The knocks had stopped as if the sound had been only a doorbell. The whispering gathered high along the ceiling and then resolved into a soft rain. I realized I was hearing paper. sheets sliding against one another. A carton at the front row showed its corner. The fiber was too smooth, like skin pretending to be paper. I eased the wrap and revealed not fixtures, not king goods, not anything a doc would sign for. The box held folded maps. Hundreds, all blank. Each piece had faint creases where roads should be, as if the paper were remembering them in private. I closed the carton and the wrap sighed back into place like a curtain content to hide again. The maps whispered as if embarrassed at being seen without their lines. I stepped down and shut the doors carefully, palms flat to keep the metal honest. The spare seal clicked home with a number that matched nothing. I snapped a photo and said the time into the phone so I would not lie to myself later. The instant the latch settled, the knocking returned. Louder now, impatient, not angry. Urgent. I climbed into the cab and let the engine put a hand on my back. The lot thinned as drivers chose anywhere else to be. On the ramp, the trailer tugged, once like a child trying to get a parent's attention. I told it to wait. The knocks did not care. They spoke their simple language until the highway found its speed and the sound softened into the background noise of running gear and wind. I kept my eyes forward and felt the paper voices nest behind me, a flock riding the slipstream. The receiver refused the load with polite confusion. The purchase order number existed. The shipment did not. The clerk printed a copy of my own paperwork, and it looked different in small ways that mattered more than I wanted. Company names leaned into older fonts. The shipper's address wore a zip code that had not been used in 10 years. The dock door opened, and I backed in. When the bay light turned red, the knocks ceased like a radio switching off. An hour later, the manager returned with empty hands. "There's nothing back there," he said, meaning nothing he could inventory. My trailer left their lot without a new seal and without an answer. I parked it in a gravel yard 2 towns over and turned in the keys as if I had finished a shift for someone else. At night, when the wind moves from the hills into that yard, people say they hear a measured tapping that sounds like patience taught itself to speak. I do not visit after dark. I do not open those doors again. Story 10. The night the map rewrote itself a map is a promise on paper. Lines say, "Turn here," and numbers say, "Trust me." And a driver learns to believe both, because belief keeps the miles smooth. Paper atlases live in the passenger seat, like an old friend who knows every shortcut. GPS is the younger cousin with a shiny voice and a habit of being certain even when it should not be. Between the two, the road feels like a story already written. Some nights, ignore the script. Drivers whisper about routes that shift while you watch. Signs that disagree with themselves. Towns that sit where fields were at lunchtime. Lines on paper that crawl like ants and settle in new shapes when you blink. They say if you follow those new lines, you might arrive sooner. They also say you may never find the old road again. I took a familiar run one winter night and learned what happens when a map decides it is not done telling its story. I could have driven this route with my eyes closed if I were foolish enough to try. Warehouse to ridge to river to city. 2 counties that never surprise me. I know where the pavement sings and where it sulks. I know which way station likes to flirt with open signs and which diner pours coffee that tastes like it remembers your name. The truck felt content, a low, steady hum that made everything else in the cab fall into line. Routine is the safest drug. I set the cruise at a number of the tires like, check my mirrors for the usual company, and settled into the small thoughts that fill the space between mile markers. The atlas sat open on the seat, creased to the right page, corners soft from use. The GPS traced my blue path with a confidence that felt earned. Nothing in that first hour suggested I would need more than fuel and a receipt. That faith lasted until a sign told me my road did not exist. It happened as simple as breathing. A green board lifted into the headlights and offered a route number I knew by heart. Only the arrow pointed to a direction that should have been impossible. East where west should have been. A second board followed with the same cheerful lie. The atlas on the seat looked up at me like a dog that does not understand a new command. The GPS stayed loyal to its line and insisted everything was fine. I slowed to let my eyes measure what my mind refused. The road continued straight as it always had. The shoulder markers wore their familiar lean, yet the boards kept inviting me to a turn that did not exist. I passed a service sign that listed a station with a brand that closed 5 years ago. The GPS corrected itself without telling me. Its blue line shifted a hair to the right, as if a hand under the glass had nudged it. I touched the screen and felt a faint warmth that did not belong to electronics. The town at the foot of the ridge is a comfort I count on. A cafe with pie that tastes like a memory. A hardware store that still keeps screws and coffee cans behind the counter. A mural that fades and gets repainted every spring. I crested the hill ready to see its square of lights spread out like a quilt. Instead, the land below lay empty and clean, a sheet of frost over fields that rolled away without interruption. Where the main street should have crossed, winter grass sighed in the wind. The church steeple had become sky. The water tower had become a pale smear of cloud. The road sign stayed, planted neatly in soil as if waiting for asphalt that never came. The GPS showed blocks and names marching under my wheels. The atlas agreed the town existed, printed in ink that had not yet learned how to lie. I slowed to a crawl, and the truck felt like a ship crossing shallow water. On the right shoulder, a mailbox stood alone with the flag up, stubborn proof that someone had once expected a letter here. I rolled on with the discipline of habit until a neat orange sign whispered detour ahead. No cruise. No cones. No reason. Another pair of orange boards appeared half a mile later and suggested a left turn onto a road I did not remember, though the shoulder brush looked clipped and the reflectors shone like new coins. Detours are part of the job. You follow, you grumble, you arrive. This one felt like being led by the hand. The new road was perfect. No ruts. No repairs. No gum embedded in the tar where workers had leaned at lunch. The center line glowed a sincere yellow. I checked the GPS and watched it redraw my path in real time, pleased to be helpful. The atlas still showed blank farm plots where my tires now hummed. I kept a finger on the map anyway, tracing the old line with a touchlight as a prayer. The truck approved of the grade, and the engine relaxed into a note that sounded like relief. I wanted to be grateful. I settled for cautious. A brand new station rose on the right, like a promise fulfilled. Canopy bright, pumps square and clean. Windows reflecting a tidy rectangle of night. The logo belonged to a chain that had a store in this county once, a long time ago, torn down when the bypass stole its customers. I pulled in because coffee is courage, and courage felt useful. The nozzle clicked with that crisp sound you only get from new equipment. The price on the display matched today, not memory. Inside, a clerk stood up from a stool before the bell chimed. She smiled like a teacher who knows your name on the first day. "Been waiting for you," she said, not a question. She slid a paper cup across the counter and poured without asking my preference. The coffee tasted exactly right. I asked how long they had been open. She said long enough and glanced at a wall map that showed roads like living veins. The line I had taken pulsed faintly on the paper, as if lit from behind. When I looked back at her, she was already ringing up a purchase I had not made. Back in the cab, I set the cup in its cradle and slid a palm over the atlas page the way you smooth a sheet. The paper moved under my hand, not wrinkling, breathing. Lines thickened and thinned like ink deciding how bold to be. A faint gray path budded from the edge of one county box, curved and connected to another as if a pencil inside the page were finishing a thought. Place names rearranged their letters and settled with a small sense of satisfaction. I blinked hard. The new road I had just taken now sat neatly drawn on the map where blank space had been. A tiny dot marked the brand new station with a label printed in a font the atlas had never used. My finger left a smudge that was not dirt. It was warmth. The page cooled at once, as if embarrassed. I lifted the atlas by the bottom corner and felt the paper hold its breath and then exhale quietly. The GPS chimed a happy little note, as if it had always known better. The cab was empty until it was not. I did not hear the door. I did not see movement. One moment the passenger seat held a safety vest and a fold of atlas. The next it held a man in a plain jacket with the calm of someone who has ridden a long time without needing to be noticed. He looked ahead, not at me. He said we should take the old road that is new tonight. I did not startle the way I should have. He wore the face of a person you remember from somewhere honest. A grocery line, a church pew, a neighbor waving across a fence. He rested a hand on the dash without touching it and named curves we had not yet reached. He said he had ridden this version of the road when he was young, only it was not paved then, and the map that drew it lived in a drawer behind the post office counter. I asked how he had gotten in. He said the same way the road had, by being believed. The new detour carried us through a fold of hills where the pines huddled close like people at a window. The surface stayed perfect until it did not. Without warning, the paint ended. The asphalt cut to gravel. The gravel surrendered to dirt with two grooves worn into it by vehicles that had never carried a plate. The GPS hesitated, then decided we were somewhere it could not name. The atlas cooled under my fingertips like a living thing pretending to be still. The road ended the way a sentence ends when a writer forgets the last word. In front of us lay a field of scrub and a black seam of water that kept its own counsel. The passenger nodded as if this matched his memory. He told me to stop. He told me to listen. The engine ticked. The water hummed a note deep under the surface. He said we would need to turn the page. He said it with a calm that scared me more than any panic could have. I set the brake and opened the atlas fully across the wheel. The pages fell into a shape they had never made, a slight overlap at the county lines, a misalignment that suggested a hinge. The paper lifted in the middle, pulled by some small intention, and I felt the truck tilt a fraction to match. The new road line brightened like a filament. It bent where the page bent. Outside, the dirt path drew itself farther into the scrub as if the world had been waiting for this instruction. The passenger reached out and pinched two corners together the way you crease a note before pocketing it. The map obeyed. The landscape obeyed. The seam of water straightened into a bridge that had not existed a breath earlier. I eased forward. The tires rolled onto boards that felt older than the rest of the scene. Below, the water muttered in a language that lacked patience. When we reached the far side, the passenger smoothed the paper once and the fold relaxed. The road under us became honest pavement again. I did not look at him because I was afraid I would see my own face. The city appeared ahead exactly where it should have been all along. Streetlights with their familiar, staggered rhythm. The quiet push of early traffic. The dock I knew, yawning its bay doors like a sleepy animal. The GPS regained its manners and thanked me for nothing. The atlas lay still on the seat, open to a page gone strangely blank where the new road had appeared. Only faint crease lines remained, the ghost of a choice. I signed the papers and climbed back into the cab to find a note tucked under the atlas cover. The handwriting was mine in a version I use when I'm very tired. It said fold here next time and drew a small arrow that pointed to a margin no road had ever crossed. On the flip side of the note, in smaller script, another line waited that I do not remember writing. It said some maps remember you if you were kind. I closed the book and drove away before the lines could start moving again. Story 11. Ice Road echoes. Ice roads keep towns alive when winter locks the land. They look solid, white highways pressed flat by the north. And for a few hard months, they let fuel and food glide over lakes that swallow boats in summer. Drivers learn to read cracks like weather and to treat silence like a warning. On good nights, the ice sings a low song that means carry on. On bad nights, it sings, and you can hear your own name inside the note. Some runs up here come with an extra rumor. Voices travel in frozen air farther than they should, and the ice remembers. Old radio calls echo back without antennas. A laugh from last season rides the wind and knocks on your cap. People claim the road can keep a conversation going long after the truck is gone. I did not plan to talk to the lake. The lake had plans, and the night was the right kind of cold to hear them. The start of an ice haul feels like stepping onto a stage after the audience has already decided to like you. The access ramp creaked under the weight, then steadied. The rig found its careful glide, and the tires learned the soft grit of chipped ice sprinkled for traction. Above, the sky packed itself tight with stars and then hid them behind a veil of thin cloud. The temperature sat so low the air looked stiff. The world went quiet in a way asphalt never manages. No braxquiad, no grit bounce up the wells. Only the distant groan of the lake turning in its sleep. The safety truck behind me kept 300 yards of buffer, and its orange light pulsed like a heartbeat learning to slow. I held the speed the dispatch sheet recommended and watched the black flags that marked the safe path with their calm little flutters. Every mile or so, a cone of frost rose from a pressure ridge like breath made visible. The engine stayed warm and patient. I kept my own breath steady to match it. Cracks speak with confidence when you weigh as much as I did that night. A long bend of sound rolled under the frame and stamped a vibration up through the floor. It was not a brake. It was the lake announcing itself. I eased off a hair to let the flex do what it needed. The groan faded. Then a whisper came through the same seam. It had the shape of words without the weight. I heard a hello that might have been wind searching for a gap. I heard my handle in a cadence I had not heard since summer. The radio sat quiet. The mic light did not flicker. I told myself air can act like a wire when the cold strings it tight. The whisper returned and chose a word you only hear in a cab. Copy. It floated up through the floor and brushed my boot like a cat testing your ankle. I answered out loud without touching the mic and felt foolish. The whisper stopped as if satisfied I was listening. In the mirror, a pair of lights appeared at the far edge of the safe lane. Not white and not red. They had the pale color of breath caught in headlights. They rode low, almost at ice level, and moved with the same careful glide I used. I called the safety truck to ask if anyone else had come out behind them. The reply came back clean. Negative. They saw only me and the long, bright scrape of my path. I checked again. The lights seemed closer. I blinked to clear the ghosting you get from reflections off snow. The lights went out as if a switch had been thrown. The darkness behind looked honest again. The safety truck offered to inch up if I wanted company. I said I was good and listened to my own voice for any shake. The shake stayed private. Ahead, the flags continued their patient rhythm. Under the tires, a fine glitter of ice dust lifted and drifted aside like tiny birds startled into a short flight. Static carried a conversation across the band without the radio turning on. It rose from under the dash, and from the door seams, and from the seam of my collar. A driver laughed the way he had laughed last January when a moose decided to escort his convoy for half a mile. A woman called out a pressure ridge warning from 2 winters back and thanked a name I did not know. My own voice threaded through as if playing on a delay. Easy on that drift. Easy. I thumbed the actual mic to break the illusion. The speaker clicked obediently and gave me nothing but the lively emptiness of a cold channel. When I let the key go, the cab filled again with snapshots of messages. All harmless, all familiar. The air felt layered, like onions of old sounds stacked under the new. I told myself the ice was a hard drive with a sense of humor. The lake was playing back anything it liked. The lake had a good memory for weather and better memory for fear. Around mile 8, the flags bent closer to one another, and the lane pinched over an old scar where last year had not been kind. A shape hunched to the right of the markers, rounded and white with drift. At first it read as a snow boulder. Then the wind smoothed the cheek of it and showed headlight glass. The hood of a tractor sat half-eaten by the ice, rib bones of frame visible where the lake had chewed, and decided to save the rest for later. I idled past with my shoulder blades tight. The safety truck called that they were seeing it too and told me not to stop under any reason. I had no wish to. Around the carcass, boot prints traveled in a messy loop, a dozen ovals pressed into a crust that could not be this season's. They crossed themselves and ended nowhere. The whisper under the floorboards picked up again and added a new word to its little vocabulary. Wait. I kept rolling at the slowest speed that still felt like trust. Cab windows sometimes catch reflections from angles that do not make sense. A splash of interior light bounces off a gauge face and paints a ghost where physics never asked for one. I know those tricks. The mirror beside my door did something else. It showed the sleeper curtain pulled back a hand's width and a figure seated on the lower bunk. Shoulders. A capítulo. Hands folded like a man taking a rest he has earned. I turned my head fast enough to make the room dip. The curtain hung exactly where I had clipped it. The bunk held the same rumpled blanket and the same extra jacket. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure had not left. It had only learned to be still enough that the glass no longer argued. The whisper under my boots said a word that sounded like close, or maybe it said cold. The difference felt small. I told myself to watch the flags and let the mirror be wrong. It is hard to tell glass what to do when the night is that quiet. Out here, mile counts are painted flat on the ice in black and renewed every 2 days. Plow crews keep them alive with love and caution. The number 30 showed up where 24 should have been. I told myself a crew got turned around in a squall. The next mark read 30 again, the paint fresh, the brush lines clean. A scarf of ground fog lifted in the beams and laid itself down again like a cat changing beds. With each wrong 30, the fog thickened and learned to carry sound more efficiently. The echoes sharpened. Voices from the band I recognized snapped into sudden clarity and then softened back into snow. Somewhere between wrong marks, the half-sunken tractor's lights glowed in the distance where I knew I had left them behind. The lane remained true. The flags refused to lie. The lake seemed to enjoy showing me that distance meant whatever it wanted. I set my jaw and swallowed the taste of iron at the back of my mouth. The lane narrowed to a path a child could have drawn with a pencil and a ruler. Flags stood closer together like people whispering. The surface shone a blacker black, a signal that the ice had thinned and learned to flex more easily. The safety truck advised a lighter touch on the throttle and reminded me that momentum keeps a heavy thing friendly. I eased to the recommended speed and felt the axles float just enough to make prayer feel practical. The voices changed tone. The playful callbacks and familiar warnings thinned. A chorus of almost words rose with the same pitch, a note that lives between yes and no. It moved from the floor to the seat rails to the cab frame and finally into the steering wheel itself. My hands learned the song by pressure. It told me where to put weight and where to lighten, where to breathe in and where to let breath go. The figure in the mirror leaned forward a fraction and did not fog the glass. Behind me, the lake made a clean report, a sound like a long plank snapping under load. The path held under the bumper and under the first set of drives, then lifted a hair when the trailer kissed the bad spot. I kept the wheel still and let the truck finish its thought. Something far back in the ice gave up with a sigh. Water stirred and fell still. The chorus in the cabin lost its pitch by degrees, as if a crowd in another room realized the show was over. The flags widened their stance. The black softened to gray and then to white again with the tiny frost crystals that sound like sugar under your boots. The safety truck called that I was clear of the thin run, and I let a single laugh out because it arrived on its own. In the mirror, the figure on the bunk rested, its hands palm up like someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and finally sets it down. When I blinked, the bunk was only fabric and jacket. Land rose gentle ahead. Dark trees lifted like a low crowd, and the ice road turned into a shore ramp with ruts that felt like home. I rolled onto dirt, and then onto gravel, and finally onto honest winter pavement. When I eased to a stop to breathe like a human again, the lake looked exactly as it should, a quiet field holding starlight. The path behind had erased itself into a smooth sheet without tracks. In the cab, a receipt lay on the passenger seat under a film of frost that did not melt when I rubbed it. It listed a weight check from a station that does not exist on ice. The total read paid. Under the total, in tidy block letters that matched a handwriting I have never used, 3 words waited. See thaw. I folded the paper once and tucked it into the logbook, then drove toward the line of trees with the heat set 2 clicks higher than before.